Want to bet? You can do it at Sports Interaction, Canada Sportsbook. Football is back. Baseball playoffs happening right now. And look at that. Hockey season starts this week. You can bet pregame, live and play, or on one of the many prop bets made for Canadians by Canadians. Sports Interaction makes it easy to deposit, play, and cash out. Join now to see all that sports betting has to offer. Head to sportsinteraction.com/SDPN. That's sportsinteraction.com/SDPN. Ontario only, 18 plus. Please play responsibly.
This is Agent Provocateur with Allan Walsh and Adam Wylde. Powered by Sports Interaction, Canada's Sportsbook.
Our guest this week has a new book out called Conflicted Scars, An Average Player's Journey to the NHL. He was one of my first clients when I entered the agent business back in 1996, when he was playing in the OHL with the Kingston Frontenacs, and I think we'll tell that story. He was drafted in the 4th round, 85th overall by the Washington Capitals in the 1996 NHL draft. He was a key player on the Ottawa 67s team that won the 1999 Memorial Cup, where he was the leading scorer in the tournament. His new book details his hockey journey with a lot of self-reflection along the way, including disturbing accounts of brutal hazing rituals, 10 to 15 concussions, 2 of which resulted in him being hospitalized with brain bleeds, struggles with mental health and depression, getting arrested for assault with a deadly weapon, and much more. Let's give a big welcome to one of my first clients, Justin Davis.
Yes. Wow, it's quite the book you got coming here.
Yeah, well, I was just thinking, who would have thought, Allan, all these years later, we'd actually be mentioning the assault with a deadly weapon and we could actually laugh about it. Your tone wasn't a laugh when I had to call you.
At some point today, you guys are going to have to explain that story because I don't know that one.
Yeah.
It was one of the memorable calls I've had in my career. But Justin, it's so great to see you again.
You too.
It's amazing to hear that you're, married with 3 kids and living a happy, productive life. And you've got this incredible new book out that I've actually read twice. I read it a second time in the last week, and I read it when you originally had sent me a draft copy before it had gone to publishing. And I think a great place to start is, why don't you tell us a little bit about how we first met and how we started working together?
Yeah, hockey's funny. You're my 3rd agent, and when things are going well, people return your calls and they get back to you quickly. And I was kind of ignored. The agent I had at that time had some premier NHL players, and I remember seeing you're in the old Kingston Gardens, and you had a suit on, and I believe cowboy boots with the suit. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. All right.
Yeah. Leaning against the pop machines, and he made his way over and we talked. And then the thing with Allan was he wasn't overbearing. He just kept showing up. And I was like, this guy's been to 3 or 4 of my last couple games. And so we got to talking, and I went on what they call in the hockey world a bit of a heater, and I kept scoring. And Allan was great. There was a thing back then, remember, I'm away from hockey, but the Red Line Report. And I think Allan basically bullied that guy into writing about me nonstop. I remember I got in a fight in North Bay, and Allan would call me and say, I talked to him, your fight's going to be in there. That's fantastic. And we met. And you know what? I think, like you see with a lot of stuff, is that he cared. He was the first one that cared and treated like a human and promoted me. So we went forward there, and I believe I was one of his first 2 clients, probably 1, 2, or 3, and the rest is history. I would have liked to made him some money, but it probably cost him more than I made him. But it was a good relationship.
Allan, why Justin? Why did you keep showing up in Kingston?
Well, let me tell you a little bit of the backstory. I had showed up at the rink in Kingston, and because I was so new in the business and so eager, I was showing up an hour before puck drop. And there was a older gentleman in a red sport jacket who was an usher, basically a ticket taker at the door. And I come through the door, and I'm the only one in the rink, and I'm wearing a suit, as Justin pointed out, with cowboy boots. And we start having a discussion. He's asking me who I am. And I said, I'm a, new agent on the scene, just getting started. He's like, you have any clients? I said, no, not really. And his name, I'll never forget, his name was Elwood. And we had talked for about 15, 20 minutes. And he was telling me about, growing up playing hockey in Kingston. He's lived in Kingston his whole life, how he's been a fan of junior hockey his whole life, that he's retired. He was a grandfather. And this was just a little part-time job that allowed him to get out of the house and make a little bit of money. And he got to watch the game for free. And he said to me, hey, do you see those two people over there? And I said, yeah, they're the only other two people standing there. He said, that's Justin Davis's mom and dad. He's a really good new player on the team. He's a rookie. Let me go over and introduce you. So Elwood kind of drags me over to meet Justin's mom and dad. And that's how the mom and dad and I, we had a half-hour discussion before the start of the game. And it was right at the end of our discussion, Justin's dad said, Justin, after the game, it'd be great if you could just meet him to say hello. He'd really enjoy that. So I guess things weren't going very well with your current agent at the time. And that's when you and I met for the first time after that first game that I was at.
It's funny to hear the background, right? Like when you go through a career and you go through everything, like just the random people that are in the right places at right times. And that's part of writing the book, is just you start to realize what happened. And who would have thought an usher in the red jacket?
That's pretty cool. That's a great story.
Yeah.
And I guess, when you guys first meet, what's the first impression between the two of you? Do you remember, Justin? You remember Allan for the first time?
Yeah, it's just, I think so much stuff is scripted in hockey, like the same sales pitch. And I currently volunteer with the Guelph Storm. Right. And I'll go stand in the lobby after the game just to talk to a couple of the kids. I have a great relationship with them. And I see the same agents there doing the exact same things from when I played. And I'm like, these people are like, they're wearing the same stuff. They're having the same conversations. So there's something about Allan that's just different. And I think even when you see the work that you do with your NHL guys, it's just something that stood out different. And that was refreshing to me. And I was a little bit of an outsider and a little different as well.
Allan, what was your first impression of Justin when you met him?
Well, I was sort of cautioned by Justin's mom and dad that he was very quiet and didn't talk much and might be a little bit shy. And when Justin came out of the dressing room and came over to mom and dad, they spoke to him a little bit, and then he walked over to me, and we had a really engaging 10-minute conversation. And I didn't find you in our first discussion shy or quiet at all. I thought that you were very well spoken and very poised for a young man who had just left home, living in billets and starting off a career in the OHL that you probably didn't know several months before that was the route you were going to take. So it was a really, I remember the conversation very well because I hadn't had that many with players before that. and I remember I drove from Kingston off to Toronto and then to Niagara Falls, and I was making my way back. I stopped in Oshawa and Belleville along the way, and then I rolled back into Kingston again. And that was the first time that we really got together. We went out for dinner and sat down together and had a chance to spend maybe hour and a half talking about, your dreams, your goals, me talking a little bit about how I saw the agent business, a little bit of my philosophy as I was in the process really of shaping it, because again, I was just starting out. And the other thing that I'll never forget about Justin is I really I had no track record. I had no client list. I really had nothing except my ability to look Justin and his family in the eyes and tell them that if we started working together, I don't have any experience, and I was very upfront about it, but nobody will work harder for them than I will. And they believed in me and they trusted me. And for the next couple of years, through a lot of trials and tribulations, good times and bad times, we were there together, and we were very much a family, all of us together.
The book is called Conflicted Scars, An Average Player's Journey to the NHL, obviously by Justin Davis. Now it's available for pre-order. It's out October 18th. Justin, it sounds like this book sort of dovetails perfectly with you and Allan's first meeting, right? You talk about your time with the Frontenacs, and I know that there was the Sioux Greyhounds in there as well and some other things. So, at this time, obviously, and this book is completely based on some of the events that happened then. And I guess, there are some things happening in the news cycle right now. We were talking about this before the show that have caused us as Canadians and as people who like hockey, and I'm saying Canadian, but 40-50% of the people that are going to hear this show are American, right? People are hockey fans, and we're putting hockey culture under the microscope right now. Can you tell us a little bit about this book and the places that it goes, because it examines just that?
Hey, interesting. A lot of different directions.
Yeah.
Hey, first of all, before I get into that, I laugh. My dad used to laugh. Used to leave a game if I was terrible after the first or second period. So if he stayed after the game and you watched me, that meant I probably played a pretty good game when you saw me. People ask, it's funny, a couple of questions I got today was, what is hockey culture, first of all? And it's interesting. I don't have the exact definition, but I think when you start playing at 5 or 6, the best way I can describe it is it's just a way that you act. You're taught a way to act. You're taught a way to dress. You're taught a way to kind of conform. When I think of hockey players, I think it's not the name on the back of the jersey. It's the name on your front of the jersey, and everybody conforms. Whereas these other sports, you're celebrated for being a personality, and you're celebrated for being something different. So hockey culture is you're just taught this is how you act, and this is the way you are, all the way from AAA hockey to junior C to junior B in the OHL. And it's not until you leave the game, I think, that you realize that some of the things I did or the way I act isn't right. And we used to refer to people that didn't play hockey as civilians. So I went to a dinner party last night. There's 2 civilians and so-and-so over there. So you used to think the civilians were the different ones, but then I'm a high school teacher, and you go to work and you tell a story, or you say something, everybody's looking at you wide-eyed, or you tell a story that you think is your 53rd best story, and they're looking at you like that's the greatest story they've ever heard. And that's hockey culture. It's just, you really don't know you're immersed in it, but you become used to it. And when I look at these guys that play in the NHL, and then they get hired in scouting roles and general manager roles, and the culture and stuff we deal with is people don't really understand that it's wrong because they've always been in it. And
right.
It took me 5-10 years. Like, I started writing this 3 years ago before all this happened, and I was 10 years removed from the game. And it's only then that I started to realize that the way that I was, the way that I talked, the way I acted, it wasn't right. But you just become immersed. I hesitate to use the word cult, but it's kind of like that, where you break free and you get out. And so I guess to answer part of your question with the book is, I was just examining what that hockey culture was. And I don't think it's till now that I've really realized what it is.
What I want to ask, Justin, is what motivated you to want to sit down and write this book? Where did that come from?
It's a great question. So long-winded again, but I was off work. I had 2 herniated discs in my back, and I had sciatica in my leg, couldn't feel my leg, and I was bedridden for like 3 or 4 weeks. Oh. And I was having post-concussion issues, memory issues, and a random person at work who I'd never expect to do it, sent me a book, and it was the Ken Dryden Game Changer with Steve Monador. And I knew Steve Monador. I played against him. I'd hung out with him a couple times in the summer. My roommate in Washington was friends with him. Guys I'm good friends with now are friends with him. And I was just reading the book, and I was like, man, I see parts of myself in this. And I was like, I closed it, and I was like, hockey maybe didn't kill him, but man, did it contribute to the things that happened. And then I started to think about things that happened to me. And I was having, like I said, memory issues. I was driving to a store, and I pull over and like, where am I going? What am I doing? Headaches. And here I am on short-term disability. And I said, you know what? I'm going to write a memoir to my kids. In 10, 15 years, if something happens to me, I started reading about CTE and what was happening to some former athletes, and I'll write a memoir, put it in a drawer, and they can read it. And it started out with the funny stories. I thought my career was hilarious. All these funny stories and all these great things happened to me. But then when I started writing, I was like, wait a second, did this happen? And I'd go to a wedding with somebody and I'd say, hey, did this really happen when we were here? And people were confirming some of the things I remembered. I got in touch with Allan, said, I'm writing a book. And I was like, this stuff in the Sioux, this is how I remember it. Did it happen this way? And he's like, absolutely. So long-winded answer, but this was never intended to get to this point. And people are like, oh, you're out to get Hockey Canada. You're out to get hockey. I'm not interested in the civil lawsuit. I'm not interested in making money. I wrote this 3 years ago before everything hit the fan. This was just to tell my story. And now I don't know if a reluctant participant, but I'm in it.
Yeah. Well, and it's got to be tough. And Allan, maybe you can speak to this a little bit too, because you talk about, right, I mean, in the way you framed what hockey culture can be, not always, but what it is, what it can be through the higher levels. It's got to be hard to swim against that current. It feels there's got to be a feeling of, because the team is sacred, because you must do what you that must stay with you even into your 40s, right? Where you're kind of, that's the way you were indoctrinated when you were young.
I've been so hesitant with this coming out and anxious. Like, this has been 2 years waiting for it to come out. And you protect the game, right? What's said in the room stays in the room. And that's what you're always taught, exactly to what you said. And I started thinking, like, hockey forgot about me 15 years ago. No one in hockey was worried about, no one's there when I'm bedridden. No one's there helping me when I'm going to the Concussion Institute right now to do work with my vision and different things. So I'm like, who am I protecting? Like, I'm protecting people that never protected me in the first place. And I'm the average player. So yeah, I've been hesitant with that, but it's funny how many teammates have reached out and people have said, hey, I was reading that and like, go for it. And I was expecting people to say, like, what are you doing? But I would say 95% of former teammates and people that know me know why I'm doing it. And they're saying, write it. I'm dealing with the same stuff. So it's been encouraging, and there's going to be people that get mad, but I mean, if they take the time to get to know me and look into it, they know why I'm doing things and doing things for the right reason.
Allan, when you have clients in it all the time, young clients who are, just breaking in, or clients who don't want to rock the boat because they're young and they want to make it so badly. You've seen that time and time and time again. How is it that you instruct them? Because again, and we're going to get into some of the things that you talk about in the book here, Justin, but Allan, when we talk about breaking that hockey culture, right, swimming upstream, there doesn't seem to be a lot of room for it. And there doesn't seem to be a lot of appetite to it because nobody wants to rock the boat in hockey. Nobody wants to come across as a, quote, problem. Am I correct in that assumption?
Sure. There's a code, and there is a culture amongst the players that very much leads to, if you're suffering, you suffer in silence. If you receive some trauma along the way, deal with it quietly. Don't ever talk about what you hear or see or what's happened to you inside the room, because you don't do that. And there are so many former players, former NHL players who went through junior hockey, who are now in positions of NHL coaches, NHL general managers, who experienced all these things every step of the way up the ladder. And I think there's a great fear when you hear about a revelation coming out regarding somebody, and that person loses a job, and there's a scandal around it about something that happened 15, 20, 25 years ago, people start thinking, that thing that happened that I was in the room 15 years ago, could that ever come back to haunt me?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is part of the push from so many different quarters to keep these stories, Justin's stories, other players' stories, keep it out of books, keep it off podcasts. Don't talk about it, because it could lead people to start digging, and people are very afraid of what's out there. And one of the things that you can, that anyone can really laud Justin for, is his book is brutally honest. And even when he is disclosing things that he was involved in, it's just an honest memoir of what happened. And I think any parent with a young hockey player needs to read this book. It's a must-read book before you send your kid off to junior hockey to live a couple of 100 to 500-600 kilometers away from home, with a family you don't know, in a strange city. There's wonderful teams, wonderful coaches, wonderful GMs in the Canadian Junior League who care, who take care of kids the right way. And there are some who don't care and are part of the problem. And people need guidance and direction when it comes to hearing and advising and guiding what's best for them, for the next step. And Justin, talking about some of the hazing that went on, and I think it's a great segue into what I'd like to talk about next. You talk about the hot box and your experience with the hot box in your book. Do you want to tell everybody what the hot box is and what happened to you?
Sure.
Before you do, I'm just going to ask you to lean a little closer to your mic, because we want to get cozy here, and I want to be able to hear you.
So I think two things, Dad, before that. Every time you say something, three things trigger. So number one, when we talked about what's said in the room stays in the room, I remember my editor said to me, you're talking about these people, but you're not mentioning anyone by name. It took me 2 seconds to Google these people, and I know who you're talking about. And I realized there was still a fear of some of these people. And at the same time, I didn't want to name names. If people want to take the time to look who the people are, but I'm not out to do that. But it was funny how underlying, I didn't really realize that you're still afraid, even though you're writing it, to name some people. I'm 44 with 3 kids and a wife.
Yeah.
I don't want to say somebody's name. I think the second thing too is when I wrote this with the hazing, I was looking back on it like 20, 25 years ago, and I'm like, well, I played junior C in 1993, 94. It's not still happening. And then the Kyle Beach stuff came out, and I'm like, hold on a second. Like, this is 2014 and this is still going on. And the Turnpenny report came out with with Sheldon Kennedy, and they're talking about hazing and things going on in the CHL up to 2000, like from 2016. And so when you're talking about the hazing, I just assumed it was in the past, but the fact that the stuff is still going on, the fact in junior A hockey, in the last year or 2 years ago, there was 2 players suspended for 12 and 6 games for hazing. So it's still happening. So that's to go to your last point too. I wrote this, that talking about my past, and it was brutal, but it's still going on. So then to go to the hot box, it's been a conflicted, I called the book Conflicted Scars because I tell stories, laugh, and the good times, and I'm still conflicted. The hot box is basically, as a rookie, you take off your clothes, you walk to the back of the bus, you tell a joke. If the veterans don't laugh, they put you in the bathroom. The people they hate the most, they go in first because they're in the longest, and then it goes like that. The bus driver turns on the heat in the bathroom, And they closed the door, and eventually, I don't know if we had 5 rookies, 6 rookies, 7 rookies, and not there to nitpick it, but let's say there's 6 of us that were naked in a bus bathroom with the heat on. We left North Bay and we were on our way to Kingston. And people will debate the time and say it was only 20 minutes, it was 30 minutes, it was an hour, it was 2 hours, it was 3 hours. The point is there were 6 or 7 of us in a bathroom with the heat on, but it was normal. Like, I knew about this in junior C. I played junior B. This was normal, and it was a rite of passage, and I almost felt great about myself when I came out. Like, I endured this. I did this. Generations have done this. I'm now a good rookie. I've gone along with it, and you sit there and you don't think about it. So when all this hotbox stuff came up, I was like, what are people complaining about? This is something that happened all the time. So I start writing this in a memoir. Then I think back when I'm writing it, I'm like, I think at one point when I'd take off my clothes, I was tying a skate lace around my junk, like on the bus. And then I asked somebody, and they're like, no, we had to do that. And you had to walk down the aisle, and everybody has to yank on the skate lace as you go down. And the people that got it the worst were always the worst actors. So it's someone got them good, so I'm going to get somebody else good. And then there's some guys that didn't participate in it, like did the fake, like they did it and would just ignore it and go from there. So I started writing this, and I'm like, did this happen? And people are like, yep, it happened. And I was like, well, that's abnormal, right? Mm-hmm. And then I started to think,
it's so out of the pit. Like I never played hockey to lie. I don't even know how someone comes up with a ritual like that. You know what I mean? Like, for somebody on the outside like myself, that would never occur to me.
But then it gets to the point I start thinking, okay, who's on the bus? And I'm like, well, wait, there was 3 coaches. I'm a rookie. I'm sitting at the front of the bus. There's 3 coaches like 6 feet away from me. Yes. So then you start to think, well, number one, it happened to them 20, 25 years ago. Right. So it's something that they're used to. And it's normal to them. So like for me, if I had stayed in hockey, I would have thought that was normal, and it keeps going. So when you talk about breaking the cycle and the rehabilitation of it, it's like, people find this weird, but I don't blame the coaches. I really don't, because they thought it was normal. It was probably happening in 28, 29, 30 different like cities in the CHL. And it was a badge of honor. And I really thought it was a badge of honor until 3-4 years ago. And then wasn't going to get into this, but like in the recent Hockey Canada filings, there was someone on the record saying that if their kid played in the OHL right now, they went through it and they would have no problem with them doing it. It was fun. It was 15, 20 minutes, and it's okay because you're naked 30% of the time with your teammates anyway. So it's normal. And this is what you just sit there and you're thinking, how is this normal? And for me not to realize that it was abnormal until I started writing this is shocking in itself. But I hope I broke it down correctly. It just, you assume everybody knows about it, but
never heard of it.
Yeah.
But that's how badly parents and kids want to play in the NHL. And this is the avenue, a means to an end to get there. And it just goes to show you what they're willing to endure to get there.
Yeah, and the goal of it too is they tie your clothes up, they throw them in a ball, they throw it in and say, if everybody gets dressed, then you guys can come out. But they know no one's going to do that. We crack the window open. They always say if you crack a window open. But you know what? There are some guys, that are always uncomfortable. We had a good leadership group, and it's tough to say that. But again, it's so cyclical and people are so used to it that it just becomes normal. So good people let it happen, and the same thing happened to them.
Wow.
Yeah. And well, at one time in your book, you said, and it actually had a great impact on me, the adults were supposed to be the responsible ones in the room, right? You're dealing with 17, 18-year-old kids for the most part. But what about the adults? They're the ones who are supposed to know better.
Yeah, but when you talk about toxic culture and you talk about a culture, like this has been going on since the 50s and 60s, right? And I said, there aren't many coaches that were back then that did not play themselves or that weren't involved in it. And it's the norm, and it's until you get rid of the norm. Now, it was banned my years won't be, but it obviously doesn't happen anymore. And thank goodness. But there are just so many things. And I talked about hazing a little bit more, and people are like, oh, it's not that bad. You only did those 2 or 3. I left a lot out. I'm a high school teacher. I got to walk down the halls and I got to see people. I don't want my parents knowing the half of the stuff that happened, but there's a lot of us that played junior C hockey because it was a small town, and that was the worst of the hazing and junior B and the OHL. When I played junior C hockey, you had to do a push-up naked in a bathroom and with you're drunk in a cup of beer, and then you left the room, and then the next person had to chug a beer. And then you start to get back to the room and you realize what you've done is you've drank the beer that the last person in front of you did the push-up in. And then you're naked the whole time. People are shaving your body, your head's getting shaved. And it's just this, when you talk about sexuality and you talk about the culture, you're so broken down into thinking this is normal. So for someone on the record with Hockey Canada to say we're naked together 30% of the time, I totally get where he's coming from, because it's somehow just the culture. And when I look back on this, like, listen, I'm not saying it for a reaction or to go after people. I'm just saying this is what led me to the point where I was 18, 19, and I thought this stuff was normal.
Yeah. Well, and what else are you supposed to think?
Right. I don't know anything different than, like, Allan had a good point. It's probably, how many other sports do you move away when you're 15, 16, 17, and you move in with a family you don't know? And even now, my son was 16 his draft year last year, and there's kids moving to the GTHL at 12, 13, 14 and living with families. And so it's a sport where kids move early. And so really you're leaving it, like, to come back to the point, you're leaving it to the adults who are supposed to be the responsible ones in the room. My parents were promised that these people would take care of me.
Right. So why don't we talk a little bit about concussions and some of your experiences with concussions while you were playing junior hockey. First, how many concussions do you think you had in your entire career?
I'd say like between 12, 14, 15 concussions. And I think the major ones, every bump after, you just felt that little fuzziness. So whether they're the minor ones, and you find out after the fact dealing with concussion experts now that there really are no minor ones. But after those major ones, there was just times where you protect yourself. So to get into my first major one, I remember we were playing, Barrie was an expansion team at the time. And we were playing at the old Dunlop Street Arena in Barrie, and I got slew foot coming up the ice. And for people that don't know what a slew foot is when someone kicks your feet out and pushes your chest backwards, and usually you hit your head on the back of the ice. And I just remember it feels like deja vu when you have a concussion, a really bad one. Everything goes gray, everything slows down. It just feels like the world's frozen. I remember getting back to the bench, and I started to throw up on the bench, and we had a trainer at the time, and we all talk about this. Like the trainers at the time, they weren't trainers.
No.
They were equipment people. They were stick boys. They were trainers. And remember the trainer at the time
doing it for 20, 30 years.
Exactly. He kept his dentures, I remember, in a cup in the dressing room, and he was a hotel manager. And so he comes down and says, "Hey, everything all right?" And I'm like, "Oh no, I think I'm good." Well, I'm throwing up, and the coach says, "Okay, I think you can go out for the power play." So I went out for the power play. And it's the first time in my career I can remember coming off, and I had no idea what happened. Just where I was, what I did on the ice, and I just came off and I said, "I'm not right." So they said, at the end of the period, we'll take you to the dressing room and we'll have you evaluated. So the period, I had to sit on the bench for 5-6 minutes, went to the dressing room, and I saw a doctor. They said that, you've got a really bad concussion. So they said, because we only have a trainer, what we're going to have you do is just lay in your equipment in the shower. We're going to turn the lights off because it's not good to have lights when you have a concussion. And we're going to go out and play the third period, and we'll come back. Because at that time we had one trainer, right?
So you're by yourself?
All by myself in the dressing room, in the shower, lights off, just laying there waiting for the game to end. So they come back in, the doctor reevaluates me and says, yep, you got a bad concussion. So go home. Have your billets wake you up 3 hours. If you've got a headache, take a Tylenol or take something and all things that you find out after the fact. They're just so far off. But we had one trainer. So his job was to take care of the guys on the ice. He couldn't take care of me, and there wasn't a support staff. So I played the next weekend, and I just think back of that and it just like horrifies me that I did that. But with all the recent concussion stuff that comes up, no one was there to tell me no. I wanted to play. I played my first game as a rookie because someone got injured in warm-up. I got a hat trick and I never came out of the lineup. So my thinking was, I don't want to come out of the lineup. I'm playing great. I will play. But there was no one there to protect me from myself. And I think if you talk to NHL guys, you talk to athletes, they're like, why did you play? Well, I thought I could go. But where's the adult again? Where's the adult in the room that says no? Where's the coach where I'm almost puking on his shoes and knows I'm in the dressing room to say, oh, you can't play next weekend? So that was number one. And that was a big one. And it makes me sick to think of hitting my head on the ice. Whenever I watch someone get a concussion, like I just get that feeling and it makes me sick and I can't watch it.
And what you said just now is so true. When you think about it, one of the things that happens when you have a concussion, or what I like to describe it as a traumatic brain injury, which is what a concussion is, a traumatic brain injury, that person does not have the cognitive ability to make a rational judgment about whether they are good to play or not. And that's why the decision on whether someone can go back into a game and when that person is cleared to go back and play games has to be left to doctors, right? Not a player by himself saying, no, I'm good to go. Well, you don't get to make that decision. Not with this kind of injury. And that's took a great evolution in thinking to get it to the point where now there is hesitancy for the most part before allowing players who've had a traumatic brain injury to get back into action. Although look what's happened in the NFL in the last couple of weeks with Tua and the fact that, clearly we all have eyes. Mm-hmm. Clearly he exhibited all of the classic physical symptoms of a traumatic brain injury, went back into the game, and then next game had that violent hit with his head back down on the ground, and now he's out indefinitely.
Yeah, and to go with that, like I was 16. So when you talk about this, we're talking about Tua and we're talking to these NHL guys. I was 16 years old. Like I watch my son's 16. He makes a bagel and forgets about it, almost burns the house down. Right? So like you think of, did I have the rational decision making to do it? Like, of course not. So fast forward then to like with the Tua stuff. So I'm playing in Sault Ste. Marie. We're playing Detroit. I make a pass and I make 3 steps up ice. And back then, late hits were you got 2 or 3 steps. Now you take that 1 step and it's late, they call it. And I don't remember anything else. My world blacked out. And my dad came down to the ice. He came down to the glass because he was there with my grandma. And I was having I believe it's called fencing syndrome, where your hands are like Tua, where his hands were like this. And my arms were out. I was having little seizures on the ice and they took me off the ice on a stretcher. And I didn't regain consciousness until I got to the dressing room. And I always remember smelling salts. The first time I came to it was Peter DeBoer, the NHL coach, was coaching the the Plymouth Whalers at the time. And he was standing over top of me and it was the first face I saw. And he was just like, "Are you okay?" And it was actually like showing genuine concern. It was the other team's coach, right? That was in there. Not my own coach, the other team's coach at the intermission. And I went through the testing and I was not in a good spot, obviously, going through all that. So I walked back to the dressing room in my equipment. So they took my skates off. I walked back with our trainer. And the trainer at this time in the Sioux was the first qualified trainer I had. He had an actual fanny pack. He had the towel. He looked like the part and he had a degree. And I think he went to I've always wanted to track down who it was, and I think he went to play to work in pro hockey, but he was great. But he took me over to the dressing room. I showered, felt terrible, and then I got on the bus. And when I look back, people are like, how did Tua get on the plane and fly? I look back and I'm like, why did I walk to the dressing room? Why did I shower? Why did I get my clothes on? If that happened today, watching junior hockey, you would have been on a stretcher, you would have been taken off, you would have been put in an ambulance, and you would have gone to the hospital. But
Straight to the hospital.
Straight to the hospital. But I dressed myself and I went to the bus. I started throwing up all over the bus. Bathroom of the bus, just throwing up. I was not myself, in and out, just kind of trying to figure out where I was. And one of the players yelled to the front. They said, he's not right. The general manager traveled with the team, and the staff that was there decided that they were going to get me to Canada. So they go to Canada and get a Canadian hospital. And you look back on it, and this is where Allan come in too, is to avoid the U.S. medical bills, right?
Oh, they didn't want to pay for
Did not want to pay. Hospital. But the trainer came back, and I look back on it, and you think of times where someone could have saved my life, because I was playing senior hockey about 8 years ago, and someone had the same thing, hit their head on the ice, bleeding on their brain, and passed away. Oh. So the trainer said, go to the hospital. So we pulled in the hospital. They didn't want to wait for me, right? They did not want to wait because it was the playoffs and they had a big game coming up. So they dropped me off. They rushed me to get a CT scan, and they found bleeding on the brain. And they rushed me to ICU, and I was hooked up to IV and given my own space. And I spent three days in ICU. The team left. My mom drove down and spent 3 days with me in the hospital. And I just look back on it. I'm like, nobody stayed. Nobody cared. They tried to sneak me to the States. I say sneak. They tried to get me to the States so that they wouldn't have to pay the bill. And I go back. I skate a little bit at the end of the season. Thank God I look back on it. We got beat out. We got upset in the second round by the Guelph Storm. We had a great team. We had Joe Thornton and future NHLers, but we got upset and I didn't play. And I'm like, thank goodness I didn't play. But this is where you come in, Allan, where I'm out of it. Don't really know what's going on, but my parents receive a medical bill for, was it $15,000, $10,000? Somewhere in that vicinity.
$15,000 plus.
And my mom's in a panic. My parents didn't have a lot of money at the time. And they're like, how are we going to pay this bill? And I'm like, what do you mean pay the bill? They can pay the bill. And the team basically was telling her they had to pay the bill. At the same time, Allan, because he's on everything right away, is calling the team saying, what are you doing sending this bill? And you can correct me where I'm wrong. And they're telling Allan, oh, no, we're going to pay the bill. I don't know what happened. And you want to fill in from there on this one?
Yeah, they initially didn't say they were going to pay the bill.
Yeah.
They initially said they're only responsible for medical expenses that occur within Canada. And hockey-related injury that occurs in the league outside Canada, well, the family is responsible for that. That was the first interaction I had with the general manager over this injury, to which I lost my collective mind. and after a long series of expletives and threatening his life and that of everybody else associated with him, he then told me that, okay, we'll find a way to pay it. But then he called Justin's mom and said again, we're not paying the bill. I don't care what your agent says, and we're just not going to pay. And there was a battle that went on for several days before, I just said, you know what? I'm just going to send all of this to the media and let the media know how you're treating one of your own players, and see if the people running the OHL and the people in the media are going to approve of one of your own players in ICU from a horrible traumatic brain injury on the ice that resulted in a brain bleed, and you're effectively washing your hands of the player and any responsibility you have for the player. And ultimately, he agreed very reluctantly to take care of the bill.
And to go with that, and that's the initial plan was, let's get him to Canada. But meanwhile, I'm throwing up over the bus, and the trainer is the one that said, we're getting him to a hospital. I'm not having this on my watch. And it comes back to the book. Why did you write the book? And I say an average player's journey. I'd been drafted to the NHL. I was a normal player, but they had no problem treating me that way. I played with Joe Thornton and Richard Jackman that year, who were two high-profile NHL guys, and that would never happen to them. They would have been two guys staying in the room with them, and they would have paid that bill. And that was the first time I understood really
there was a hierarchy.
The hierarchy of it all, and that's what I'm trying to tell parents when I talk about this. There's very few Sidney Crosbys, Connor McDavids, and high-profile players in the NHL. It's the average guys that maybe don't make the NHL that are dealing with a lot of these issues. So I thought I'd be the spokesperson, and I never forgot it. And maybe fast forwarding on it, but we were playing in the Memorial Cup, and I remember watching, I watched the ownership group and the GM, I guess, were visiting to watch the Memorial Cup, and I was making my way over, and it's the first time my brother made a rational decision in his life and said, just leave it alone. Like, you've won. But it's I'll never forget. I can't remember my kids' birthdays sometimes, but I can remember the name of every person that was involved in that.
Yeah. Yeah. And now let's talk a little bit about the time that you got arrested and what happened there.
Well, okay. And it's funny when you write this, you have, I by no means am innocent. I'm not pleading that I was this innocent person that did everything correctly and I treated everybody correctly and I've never been involved in any incidents. That's not it at all. And it's like when you're running for politics, you're afraid what people are going to dig up. But I know who I was and I know what I did. So I lived in the bottom of a house. I had the best billet situation. I had the greatest billets ever. We had an apartment. I had my own door. I had my own kitchen down there. I didn't really cook anything, but I had my own kitchen. And they were the greatest people. So guys from the team would come over all the time and just stop in. So we had a paintball team event scheduled for the Wednesday. So one guy, when we were playing, I believe in Windsor, borrowed his buddy's paintball gun. It was like a $200 gun, and it was amazing, and he wanted it for the event. So they stopped in to my apartment. So it really wasn't my fault. They stopped in first. And he had the paintball gun, and he said, we were just sitting around and doing nothing. He said, why don't we just drive around and we'll shoot at a pole or something as we're driving in the back of a pickup truck. No. And when you think of junior hockey, the boredom is, you go to practice, you come home, and like there's a lot of time to kill.
Yes.
And you've got 11 o'clock curfew, so you got to get everything done by 11. So I said, sure, let's do that. So two of us sat in the back of the bed of the pickup truck, and the other two were in the front. So we're driving, and then they shot at a pole, and they shot at a sign, and everything was normal. And then the longer it went, there'd be someone jogging down the street, and they'd shoot 20 feet behind. At no time, and I still say this, was there any intention or did anyone get hit? But they thought they'd shoot behind, and then you don't think, this looks like a gun, and you're driving around town. So anyways, they shoot 10 feet behind a guy on a bike, and we keep driving. And then I realized the guy on the bike was actually a police officer on a bike. And looking back on it, not a good decision to do everything. But so we drive into a subdivision. We go left, we go right, we go left, we go right, we go straight, roundabout, and put the gun under a tree. We go back to my billet's house, and we stay there, and we say, okay, everything's good. But we're getting paid $47 a week.
Right.
So we decide that gun is worth $200. Do we want to split the $50, or do we just want to go back in a different car and get the gun? Oh. So we go back in my 1984 Ford Tempo. We drive and we find the exact, because this tree was humongous. I just remember the tree, and we're looking under the tree. We can't find it. And then the neighborhood just turns into lights just flashing, and the whole neighborhood lights up. So the one guy in the team gets out of the car, takes his shirt off, and then starts sprinting down the street. The guy beside me gets out and he jumps into the hedges. And I don't know what to do because I'm in the driver's seat. So I just get I get the seat and I just do one of these backwards. And I recline in the seat thinking, the police officer will never check the car. So he knocks on the window and he says, you there, come here, you here, come here, you put your seat up and come out. So he said, were you the guys driving around with the paintball gun? And we said, yeah. And he said, tell you what, just follow me to the station. Nothing's going to happen, but we need to talk about it. So I said, okay, sure, no problem. We'll go. So we pull in, walk into the station, and everything's good. Everything's good. And then this guy walks in short biker shorts and a shirt, and he says, are you the guys that were shooting guns? I've been chasing you guys for an hour or 2 hours. And one of the guys says, you were chasing us on a bicycle? And then they call us in. They say, you here, you here, you here. Oh. So that's when things elevated. And bottom line is they said nothing was going to happen. You guys are all right. Nothing. No one got hit. It was fine. Just whatever. Just be careful. So go to bed. Next morning I wake up. And I always listen, even to this day. I have an old school, like one of those Viking clock radios. Mm-hmm. And the alarm goes off and I hear 4 Kingston Frontenacs charged with assault with a deadly weapon. Oh. And I realize that someone from the Kingston Whig Standard every night comes in and goes through all the stuff and goes through all the files, and they found that. So I've never woken up so quickly. And I go upstairs and my billet's always made me chocolate chip muffins every morning. And the newspaper was there and I'd read the paper and there's no paper. And I'm like, well, I said, where's the paper? And they're like, oh, we didn't get it today. It didn't come today. And so I'm just trying to figure out what's going on. And long story short, we were on the front page of the paper and went to school and I just waited for the call. You're going to the rink. So the call came and said, you need to go to the rink. And I remember it was the coach GM and the owner at the time, his name was Ren Blair. And he was just this old hockey guy. And he discovered Bobby Orr. Okay. He was the guy that discovered Bobby Orr in Parry Sound.
And he's the guy that signed Bobby Orr to a C form. Okay. Which at the time there was no draft. So you would sign a prospect to a C form for $100.
Wow.
Yeah. And Ren Blair was a Bruin scout who discovered Bobby Orr and got him to sign his C form, laying claim onto his NHL rights for $100.
Wow. So Ren comes in the room and he's this legend. We've never met him. And then he just goes on this 40-minute story of his dad giving him a crystal ball and they shined it. And the story is going exactly, we have no idea what he's talking about. So I looked at the guy next to me. I'm like, I honestly just make it end. We'll go to jail. We got to make this end. So he finishes. And then the coach GM basically says, you guys are in trouble and you need to get a lawyer. And we got a lawyer and they made a deal that if you signed an NHL contract, that you would have to pay this fine. If you didn't sign an NHL contract, then you wouldn't have to pay him the money. So he did that and he was great. So I saved money by not signing an NHL contract, right, Allan? So fast forward, like we were charged and basically we were found, like everything was good. Charges were dropped. Everything was gone. And, but they wanted to look good and they wanted to make us pay the price. So they gave us 200 community service hours and we had the deal with the fine. And then the team said, you know what, we're going to match the 200 community service hours. So we're going to give them 400 hours. Well, we have 3 hours a day where we're not on the ice. We're not in school. So I'd finish practice and I'd go to a blood donor clinic and I'd be serving cookies at the blood donor clinic and I hate needles and I'd just be trying not to look at the people. We'd go to a bingo at 8 at night. And you remember bingos back then with the smoke. And I remember the first night I had the bib on and some lady's like, I'll get a jackpot, a super jackpot, a super duper jackpot. And you're trying to hand these things out. And my pot was, I was short $50 at the end of the night because I screwed up how things were. So I'm like, I just got banned from my community service that I'm doing for this. And so it was a long, long year and you were there with the process and it was awful.
Remember calling me? Oh, you remember calling me to tell me you'd been arrested?
Oh, and you don't even know how to start. Try like telling your parents. And I think you and my dad were the ones who were like, "What were you thinking?" And my mom was the only one that paused and said, like she always did, "What can we do?" And she didn't even ask what I had done, but she said, "What can I do?" And it's idle time, too many guys, whatever. And thank God we didn't do any damage and nothing happened, but it's these stories. But back then, the hockey news was the be all end all. Like every guy in the bus had the hockey news, you'd read it And the Associated Press picked it up. The Hockey News put it in. So every rink you went into, like you line up for a face-off in front of the other team's bench and you're like, oh, don't say anything. They'd be like, why don't you hit him with your paintball gun? And the whole bench would laugh. And I still laugh because I'd be 6 years after the fact playing pro hockey in Germany, and there'd be a Canadian guy in the other team would be like, make a paintball joke. And I was like, this is still going on. We were, it was a pretty big event in junior hockey back then.
Wow.
Well, around that time after the incident, you were touring a prison.
Yeah.
And an inmate in the prison had a message for you. Do you remember what that was?
Yeah, we did the Kingston Pen. We had a player doing the Kingston Pen tour, and we're walking, and they used to play our games back then on radio on Friday nights. It was something that just for the inmates to listen to. And one of the guys yelled, I won't say the names of the other people, but they basically told us they'll see us soon. and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and it's something I'll never forget. And I came out of there after 30 minutes. I'm like, oh, please, I'm fragile. I wouldn't last more than 3 minutes in here. But yeah, the timing was impeccable.
Wow. Yeah. So this is going to be a heck of a book, and Allan's already read it twice. It's not fair. He got a head start.
Yeah.
But Conflicted Scars, an average player's journey to the NHL with Justin Davis. It's available, like I said, October 18th, 2022. That'll be this year, but the pre-order is available now, and you can get it ECW Press. Can you tell us a little bit before we kind of wrap it up about your time in Ottawa as well? Because I know it was transformative for you.
Yeah, things didn't work out in the Sioux, and I got traded to Ottawa. And I remember Brian Kilray told Allan, actually, he just said every time we played them, he seemed to score. So I'm happy to have him on my team. And I can't say enough about him. There's so many things that are going to come out of this about hockey culture and the bad things in hockey. And Brian Kilray saved my life. I was in a dark, dark place with depression and just wondering if I wanted to keep going. And I remember when I got traded there, him and his wife, Judy, actually took me home from practice, and I stayed in his house. And I sat down with dinner with Judy and Brian Kilray. He talked to me, asked questions about my family. He took me downstairs to his chair where he watches hockey. And he said, watch the game. There's a fridge here if you want anything to drink. This is your room. Go ahead and do that. And I felt human for the first time, like a human, and he cared and he had good things to say about me. And I'll always forget, he had a rotary phone, the phones that just went around, and I had a calling card. And I was trying to put in my number.
It's like a 10-digit number, right?
And every number felt like was zero, or it was just going around. And then finally I was just like, forget it. I'm just going to call on his phone long distance. And yeah, just a great man. And that was just the start of the journey with him.
And I mean, like you said, and Allan, you kind of mentioned this before too, there is so much in this book, right? We're talking about, we've talked about the culture, we've talked about the concussions, we talked about it, but there's so much more to this that people are going to grab, because again, there's good and bad here, right?
Exactly. And that's why I call it Conflicted Scars, because that was the time of my life. We won a Memorial Cup, had the best time of my life. And with him, I talk about in the book, they used to healthy scratch you, which means you wouldn't play in a game, and they wouldn't tell you. So you'd get on a bus in Kingston, you'd bus to Windsor, you'd be walking off the bus, and they'd say, hey, you're not playing tonight. Oh. And you'd have family, and that was before you could text. With Brian, you knew right away what was happening. If you weren't playing, he would tell you. He would yell at you. It was so loud, the whole arena would hear. And when he came in between periods, if you made a bad pass, you just put your head down. You're like, oh, please don't look at me. Please don't look at me. And he'd find you, and he'd light you up. But then the game would end, and you'd be walking out, and he'd say, I saw your parents here tonight. Here's $20. Take them out for dinner. You did a really good job in the third period. So you knew where you stood before you went to bed. You knew where you stood before you left, and he treated you like a human. You knew he'd yell at you and he'd coach you hard, but at the same time, he knew like that you had feelings, and he knew what it was like. He was in junior hockey for 30, 40 years. You'd have some coaches would sit you the whole third period, healthy scratch you. You'd take a bus home. No one would talk to you. You'd be in another jersey on the fifth line the next day at practice. They wouldn't talk to you, and your mind would just race and race and race and race. But Brian was up front, and my mental health was obviously because of him just made a turn, and I loved hockey again.
Justin, it's been a real pleasure getting to know you, man. Like it's right away, he's one of the warmest people that you could meet, right? It's funny, as I begin to meet people in Allan's circle, I'm noticing they all have that sort of quality where there's like a warmth. And I was driving down my street, Allan, and I was picking up some Starbucks for us. And I looked in and I saw him in the truck, and he looked at me, and I thought, okay, that's got to be him. Got out and shook my hand and come on, let's go. And like literally, he's walking into a stranger's house, right? So, Justin, you're a real pleasure. Good luck with the book. And obviously, you know, it's been great having you on. It's been fantastic to meet you.
Perfect. I appreciate you taking the time.
This has been Agent Provocateur with Allan Walsh and Adam Wylde. Powered by Sports Interaction, Canada's sportsbook. Follow Allan Walsh on Twitter @WalshA. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts by searching Agent Provocateur and hitting the subscribe button. YouTube.com/SDPN.